I'm Ann Jacobs. I'm the director of the Prisoner Reentry Institute, and it's my distinct pleasure to get to welcome you to John Jay College of Criminal Justice this morning. This is the third in a series of symposia on youth justice that have been generously funded by the Pinkerton Foundation as part of one of the projects that I am the most fond of. My partner, Jeff Butts from the Research and Evaluation Center, and I have had the opportunity to develop the Pinkerton Fellowship Initiative, which is a collaboration with youth justice agencies to take students at the undergraduate and graduate level and place them in service to youth justice agencies as an opportunity for their own development and their contribution. And as part of that, we explicitly are focused on and interested in contributing to the robust exchange among those of us, of you, who do youth justice work, and the symposia is one of the ways in which we try to do that. So this morning we're here to consider one of the most topical issues in New York right now, which is raise the age. And I'm very happy to have you here and to introduce you to the president of the Pinkerton Foundation, Rick Smith.
Thank you, Ann. I've never been a microphone I didn't have to raise. Although my wife contends that I've never been in a room where I actually needed a microphone. I'd just like to add my word of welcome on behalf of the foundation to all of you. As Ann mentioned, this is part of a program that we are enormously proud of, the Pinkerton Fellows Initiative. And I was especially pleased to meet several of the fellows who were in the room this morning. The program, as Ann indicated, is primarily a fellowship program that delivers some of John Jay's best and brightest in both graduate and undergraduate students to nonprofit organizations, mostly community-based, working in New York City in the youth justice field. When President Jeremy Travis and I were talking about this initiative a couple of years ago, he mentioned something that was very surprising to me, and that is that the role of nonprofits in youth justice had a very, very low profile on the John Jay campus, for reasons that I think we can all understand, but it still bothered him and it seemed a little odd to me. And as a result of that, we added two components to the program. One, a seminar on the role of nonprofits, a 4-credit course that most of the Pinkerton Fellows take on the role of nonprofits in the youth justice system. And the other is this, a series of symposia on critical issues in youth justice. And we are very, very pleased to give a little wider exposure to some very important issues, and one that we're talking about today that has long been of interest to the Pinkerton Foundation. And see my friend Yuval over there, and we work with him and Judge Barriero on another Raise the Age initiative, and we've worked with Judge Lippman as well. So we're deeply involved in this issue, and I am looking forward to a stimulating morning of discussion. I just want to mention that Julie Peterson is a member of the Pinkerton staff who has been with us for only a few weeks now, a couple of months actually, but has had a long history in the youth justice field, and she is going to be deeply involved in these programs going forward. So thank you very much, and enjoy the morning's discussion.
Good morning. I'm Jeffrey Butts from John Jay College. I am the third of 4 prefatory speakers this morning before we introduce the keynote, or the opening speaker. Thank you all for coming. We are all very excited here about the Pinkerton Fellowship Initiative, which is growing and diversifying. In addition to the course that Mr. Smith just mentioned, we're also beginning to plan, and we're adding a course this coming spring that will be taught by Professor Mike Maxfield, who's sitting over there, on evaluation and youth justice, how to apply evaluation skills in a youth justice setting. We are committed to growing cohorts of trained master's level and some PhD level researchers who are prepared to go into agency settings and help you build a new evidence base for youth justice in the future. So we are hoping to increase their practical skills, their orientation toward evidence in a way that is useful and not simplistic, which is, we covered in our last symposium, many people interact with the evidence world in a way which is fairly simplistic. So that's our mission here at the Pinkerton Fellowship Initiative. This morning we're talking about a very important issue for New York and the country, which is raise the age, and you'll notice the title is raise the age, comma, turn the page. That is meant to imply that there's a policy agenda which is larger than a single change in state law. So I think most people in this room would probably agree with the notion that a young person, an adolescent, a child, should not be held fully criminally responsible, but at some point we would all acknowledge that that deference to adolescent development and childhood does end. But when does it end? At what age does it end? Under what conditions does it end? And just to set aside one thing that people often think, this is not a new issue. Some people might think this has been an issue since the 1990s when we started hearing about super predators and states were transferring youth into the criminal justice system. It goes back beyond that. It doesn't even start in the 1970s when New York changed its laws. This issue has been around literally for centuries. When do we hold a child responsible for their behavior in a way that has criminal penalties associated with it? At what age, under what conditions? And just to give you an example, if you read the history of juvenile law, juvenile policy, you find yourself quickly beyond the years where most people think the juvenile court started. So everyone reads the same history, which has the year 1899 in it, which is when the state of Illinois passed the law to set up the first juvenile court in Chicago. From that moment forward, there were always discussions about ages and cutoffs and criminal versus juvenile jurisdiction. But if you really read the history of juvenile law, you find yourself reading about the 1300s, the 1400s, because it was as of the 1300s that under English common law, there was a presumption that at some age a child was incapable of criminal intent, and the phrase at the time was beyond punishment or not deserving of punishment. But there were always exceptions and there were always struggles. I was just reviewing some material last night, and in a book by Justine Polier, she describes a case from, I think it was the 1400s, where a child received a death sentence for murder because, I don't know the details of the case, but for some reason, another child was killed and this child was involved. And the court ruled that because the child had lied about having done this act and tried to hide from the authorities, that proved that he or she, probably he, was aware that it was wrong. So knowing right from wrong was sufficient for the court, and they sentenced this child to death. And all the text said was the age was younger than 7. So this issue of when to hold a child responsible for their criminal behavior has been with us a very, very long time. And most of the time, state legislators try to have it both ways. They want to stand on principle, and then they want to go and make deals on a case-by-case basis, or yes, this is our principle, we'll have exceptions for this law, or exceptions for that behavior, or exceptions for this crime. How do we deal with this? The state of New York tried to cope with this more than 30 years ago by changing its laws. We are now revisiting this issue and deciding where the line should be drawn. And the problem, the way I always describe it, the biggest challenge is not the fact that we have a line between family court and criminal court jurisdiction. Where the biggest problem is not where to draw the line. The real problem is the fact that we always have this line, or as I describe it as magic birthdays. There's one day in which suddenly you're responsible for everything, instead of having a graduated, developmentally appropriate approach. And that's a struggle that we will all be facing in the coming years. So we are going to hear an interesting set of speakers today, some good panel discussions. We set aside a lot of time for you to go back and forth and ask questions, and we hope we'll have a lot of interaction. If there are any mechanical problems like hearing and AV, let us know. As people drift in, I see some friends over there against the wall. There are seats available. You'll just have to embarrass yourselves by walking through the crowd. I keep telling people it's like boarding a small commuter jet. You just have to make your way through the roads. So we are going to start by having Mishi Faruqee from the ACLU come up and introduce our first speaker. Mishi.
Good morning, and today I have the honor of introducing someone who literally needs no introduction. So Marian Wright Edelman is the founder and president of the Children's Defense Fund. She has been an advocate for disadvantaged Americans for her entire professional life. She's a graduate of Spelman College and Yale Law School, and she began her career in the mid-60s when, as the first black woman admitted to the Mississippi bar, she directed the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund in Jackson, Mississippi. And in 1968, she moved to Washington, D.C. as counsel for the Poor People's Campaign that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. began organizing before his death. She founded the Children's Defense Fund in 1973. And I had the privilege of working with Marian Wright Edelman when I was at the Children's Defense Fund, and I can say that she really is very passionate about youth justice, and it's been so meaningful to have her voice and have her leadership on this issue, and she really cares deeply for the young people who are at the deep end of what the Children's Defense Fund has, so aptly labeled the cradle to prison pipeline. So please join me in welcoming Marian Wright Edelman.
I'm delighted to be here, and let's just decide we're going to win this issue this year. Who's going to do it? And who's going to do that? We've been working on this issue for a very long time, but I want to just begin by just announcing what a groupie I am of Jeremy Travis, and it's always wonderful to be here at John Jay, and I think you ought to give him a round of applause. I want to thank Jeff, and I want to thank the Pinkerton Foundation for your investment in this symposium and in the young people who can become a pipeline of hope and an example of what can happen if we decide not to give up on young people. And I don't have to believe that we should be giving up on any child. We have to hang in there, and I think good policy ought to be like good parenting. And we should want for other people's children what we want for our own. And I think that should be our grounding. And we have just finished our 40th anniversary celebrating children who beat the odds here in New York and around the country. They've been homeless, they've been abused, they've been neglected, they have been subject to violence, they have just lived unthinkable lives, and somehow one caring hand saying, I see you as a human being, because they will live up or down to your expectations. One counselor, one thoughtful social worker, one teacher, one grandparent, they make a difference. And we have about 800 of them who beat the odds now, and when they came back, we could have picked any ones of them. It was just amazing. They're lawyers, they're doctors, and they're Peace Corps volunteers, and they're giving back. And so let's win this one this year. And I just want to thank you for being here to determine how we're going to do it. And I just want to acknowledge Eric Bresnader, who is a new grandfather with Alexandra, whose daughter's been heading our California office, and Melanie Hartzog, I assume you all know, who's the new head of Children's Defense Fund New York, and I've had the pleasure of working with Benny Schiraldi for many years in the District of Columbia, and you're very lucky to have him up here. So I feel like I'm among old friends. He referred to Justine Wise Polaire. We began in 1973, was our first year, and I thought we'd be out of business by now if we just told the country what the right thing to do is for children, and what the cost-effective thing to do for children, and what the self-interested thing to do for children beyond money. And we've never worked so hard. We've made lots of progress, but we still don't quite get it. And we haven't had a stronger voice, and all of you who are in child advocacy know that this is a job for marathoners, not sprinters. And so you just have to hang in there, and we have to love our children as much as the NRA loves their guns, and as much as other folk love to sort of keep their jobs in upstate New York. We've just got to hang in there and move to a different level of advocacy, and I think that we're challenged to get out of our box. But we did our first, Justine Wise Polaire was our first juvenile justice director here in New York, and the first thing she wanted to do was to get children out of adult jails. And we sent Don Rademacher into 500 jails, and we found children in jails all over the country. We saw children in my home state of South Carolina who've been put in solitary and who managed to commit suicide, and we sued the state of South Carolina. We found parents trying to teach their children a lesson and would send them over to the sheriff or to the chief of police on the weekend to teach them how to behave. It was just unthinkable what we found, but unfortunately it's still there, and we know about the Supreme Court cases. in the past year, because the United States has maintained its all solitary stance in many ways among industrialized worlds and executing children, people who committed crimes as adults, and life imprisonment for young people who committed crimes as children. I hope I'm getting it all right in my head. But we are lagging in trying to come into the civilized world in protecting children and investing in children. And it is going to be our undoing. The single biggest national, economic, and military security threat does not come from any enemy without. It comes from our failure to invest in all of our children before they get sick, before they drop out of school, before their families break up, before they go to jail or to juvenile detention. If a majority of all of your children can't read a computer at grade level, and many of them sitting in our juvenile justice institutions cannot, can't read or compute at grade level in 4th or 8th grade, if 80% of our black children and almost 80% of our Latino children cannot read or compute in 4th or 8th grade, and 74% of our 18 to 35-year-olds cannot read well enough to get into the military because of prior incarceration, because of obesity or other health problems, because of literacy level, we are in trouble. And as demographics, as you know, have changed and it's stirred up all those who fear they're going to lose their country, they better get over it, because we may not like these poor children. We may not like these poor black, white, or Latino children. We're going to need them. And I'd rather them working for us rather than us paying 2.5 times or 3 times more to keep them in jail than to keep them in school. And so we've got a fundamental effort now to try to change this country in order to help it save itself, because we are in the same box. And so I hope that we can all move forward. And while we're here today to talk about how we're going to raise the age, I hope that while we work on our specific issues, we all know how the child advocacy movement and the youth advocacy are very siloed, and we should focus and achieve those things that we can do, but there ought to be one big thing we work on together for children every year and get it done. And I hope that this year, that together will be to put a high-quality early childhood system in place in New York City and New York State and nationally. The president has proposed a $90 billion mandatory quality early education system starting with home visiting, and we've now made real progress getting the health safety net in place. 95% of all children are eligible. We couldn't get the immigrant children, even though a child is a child is a child. But we got to enroll them now. But if we could just get critical mass, quality home visiting, parent support systems, early Head Start and child care and pre-K integrated into a system that's child and family focused. We're insisting that we go through kindergarten, not to kindergarten, because we're now going to be holding kindergarten as subject to Common Core standards in only 12 states provide full-day kindergarten. You're going to move the achievement gap down further, because you're going to hold and test children for things you haven't given them the means to achieve. And so let's try to see how we can get that $90 billion in mandatory money, and you push your mayor and your governor to make New York State do its share in seeing if these children get it on the front end so that you're not struggling to protect them on the back end. But we should never give up on them, and so your work is very important. And I'm deeply grateful to John Jay and to Pinkerton and all of you who are here to get something done this year. The good news is that there are only 2 states that still hold children at too early an age, and the bad news is that New York is one of them. New York has always liked to lead everybody and everything, go win this year and come into the rest of the country and show what we can do. North Carolina is the other one, and I'm very distressed at all the way in which North Carolina has been reasonably progressive is going south. And so we've got to stop the backwards drift, but you have an opportunity, and we're catching up, and I think that we can win. We work together here in your own state to acknowledge and affirm the developmental process of young people. We take adolescent brain development into account, and we take steps to protect children and youth, but we've got to make it now policy. And that's the thing about early childhood policy. We've known for years and years that the first 3 years of life and brain development is crucial, and yet we don't catch up in our policies and our action with what the evidence and the research shows. We require that children and youth have adults sign permission slips for school trips or medical procedures. We don't allow youth to partake in certain activities because we say they're not mature enough to fully appreciate the consequences of their action. Young people can't see certain movies until their 17th birthday. I think they can see about anything they want on the internet. They can't buy alcohol until their 21st birthday, but where there's a will, there is a way. And in New York, the City Council just voted to raise the legal age of buying tobacco products and electronic cigarettes from 18 to 21. Young people can't get a tattoo in New York State under age 18, and we could go on and on and on about all the ways we prohibit children from doing things because they're not yet adults. Yet we deny the day a young person turns 16, they are automatically treated as adults in the criminal justice system, and that's what we're trying to change. A 16-year-old can be arrested without his or her parent or guardian ever knowing, and spend a night or more in jail locked up with older adults who likely have had much more engagement in criminal activities. A young person can spend 5 long years incarcerated alongside adults before they are old enough to buy a beer. In New York, some children as young as 13 are treated as adults in the criminal justice system and can be automatically prosecuted as an adult before they've entered high school, and they get younger. Children as young as 7 can be prosecuted in New York's juvenile justice system. I've got twin grandsons who are 7 years old, and boy, I would be a mother bear if anybody tries to put them into any kind of criminal justice system. This is ridiculous. Children are not little adults. Adolescents are not adults. Brain development research is clear. Their brains are still developing. We have known this for years, and the Children's Defense Fund filed an amicus brief in a juvenile death penalty case decades ago, laying out the bulk of the evidence in that case, focused on the realities and the importance of adolescent brain development. The consequences of these policies go against all the leading research on youth development and criminal justice best practices that demonstrate that although young people act on impulse, they have the ability to positively change, and incarcerating youth and adults increases crime among those youth. Intervention for youth must be developmentally appropriate to be effective. New York forces adolescents to deal with adult consequences that we know don't work. Those who are processed in adult criminal justice systems are rearrested and incarcerated at higher rates than those processed in the juvenile justice system. 80% of young people released from adult prison reoffend with far more serious offenses. In addition to being an ineffectual intervention, adolescents and adult systems are put directly in harm's way with increased rates of physical and sexual abuse and high rates of suicide. Youths in adult prisons and facilities are 36 times more likely to commit suicide while incarcerated than if they were placed in a juvenile facility. Youths in New York's jails and prisons are often subject to solitary confinement. 23 hours of isolation for days, weeks, and months at a time is simply inhumane. And as you sit here right now, only 10 miles away, there are 16 and 17-year-olds sitting in solitary confinement in Rikers Island, where the average length of stay in solitary for an adolescent is 43 days. How in the world can that happen? I was so shocked by that figure. We ought to be up in arms. This is inhumane. This is wrong. We should be calling them out. We should not be going on behind walls. Youths of color are disproportionately affected by the ineffectual practice of treating youths as adults. Statewide, 70% of 16 and 17-year-olds arrested are Black and Latino. Of those sentenced to incarceration, 80% are Black and Latino, and you all know the number by now, that a Black boy born in 2001 has a 1 in 3 chance of going to prison in his lifetime, a Latino boy a 1 in 6 chance. The prison pipeline, the cradle to prison pipeline, has become the new American apartheid. We must break it up because it's going to undo the last 50 years of social and economic progress. And we should not stand by and leave it to our children and grandchildren to fight all over again the battles we all struggled and so many people sacrificed for us to be here today. And so we've got to break it up. And the repercussions of treating youth as young as 16 as adults goes well beyond the individual child. The legacy of an adult criminal justice record is long-lasting for the youth, for the family of that youth, and for his community. Communities are harmed when young people returning home are denied jobs, educational opportunities, and housing as a result of having a criminal record. And families are torn apart by the immigration consequences of criminal records, and the relationship between massive deportation and massive incarceration is a connection we need to make. We must make these alliances and try to stop them both. I hope as you hear statistics like these, that you who are questioning why this injustice in New York State's children, for New York State's children and youth has continued, that you will feel a call to action to stop it. It's way past time for parents and faith and civil rights and community leaders and advocates across the spectrum, because children don't come in pieces and they need a continuum of care, that we will begin to get ourselves together and to become a strong voice that we cannot become if we continue to stay in our own silos and not address the whole child. Though we just must make these links even as we focus in our own particular area. I hope that you will just determine that you're going to make New York a just place for children who get into trouble, and that you can and will make advances. Now, Governor Cuomo, I guess, has championed juvenile justice reforms with the Close to Home initiative by acknowledging that youths are best served in their communities. And I just want to give a shout out to Gladys Carrion, who I think has worked very hard in trying to move New York City's youth